So it was easier for you to assimilate as a 5-year-old than it would have been for your
Definitely.
parents?
There's no doubt in my mind that I had no problem assimilating to this culture. And in all honesty, I was always treated well by the kids at school. Uh, the nuns were very good to us. We went to a high school in D.C. called St. Anselm's Abbey, run by monks. It's the number one academic school in the D.C. area. And again, we went there for free. They treated us as equals. Never felt treated any different by anyone. So we were very lucky. But again, some of the sisters did lose their teenage years, and but that was a long time ago. So they recovered from that.
So, did you experience like any culture shock?
Culture shock. Not really. If you're asking me when did I find out that I was different, there is an incident that I do remember where I finally learned that I was a little different. It was my freshman year in high school, and because of my height, I was able to start on the varsity team, and we had a little confrontation with a senior who thought he was going to start his senior year, and we were in the locker room, and we had a little confrontation, and I thought that my friends on the team were going to stand up for me, and they did not. I found myself alone, and there were a few things that were said in that conversation, which, for the first time, I think I realized that I was Hispanic, and they were, European descent, Anglo-Saxon. So I think that was a little shock to me. I hadn't encountered that until that moment. That was the first time I encountered it. The second time I encountered it is when we had to actually go through the process of becoming a citizen. Since I was young, when my parents became citizens, we became citizens. But you still have to declare. Once you're over 18 years old, you have to make a formal declaration that you want to be a citizen of this country. And I think that was the second time when it really hit me that I was different. And the old stories. You got to take the test and show that you're. I was in college. I minored in history, so I knew the American history really well. But you still have to go through the process. So I think that was maybe the second time that I realized that I was something different.
So, was since you minored in American history, the test was not hard for
It
you
was
at
not
all?
hard at all. No.
Same
In
as
fact,
that.
after about 2 or 3 questions, the judge said, "Obviously, you're a well-educated young man." So we really didn't go too far more into details. We might have discussed a little bit about the missile crisis, but that's about it.
So, in school, you learned the duck and cover.
Oh, hi boy, you're smart. That's right. We were brought up with a nuclear threat of nuclear war, and I do remember in the '60s, especially being in Washington D.C. and close to the Pentagon and the CIA, we're one of the top targets. We used to have drills, and we would get underneath the chairs, and they would tell us to take off our eyeglasses and all that good stuff. Which of course we all know that a nuclear bomb, none of that would help. But yeah, we did grow up in that. Believe it or not, out in the suburbs in Virginia, a lot of people did build bomb shelters. That was the reality back then.
So, what did your parents like think of the Cuban area having all the nuclear bombs?
Well, it was scary, very scary, and of course we know a lot more now since the Russian Empire fell apart, and so we do have a lot of the documents. So it is scary. As you know, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they do not now know that we were this close to a World War III. Theoretically, they claimed that if the United States had landed on the island, they had permission to launch the missiles. And see, that's another thing a lot of Americans don't realize, that they did have missiles. They had not only did they have land missiles, but they also had the submarines. People don't ever talk about the Russian submarines that were down and based in Cuba, and they all had missiles. And who knows where it would have stopped once the missiles start flying, we start sending them back, and then of course Russia would have to get involved. So then Russia would start launching missiles, and it was a lot closer than people remember. How close we were to a World War III.
So, did your family feel like betrayed by Fidel Castro?
Definitely betrayed by Fidel Castro. Yes. It's one of those things that happens in countries developing. People always in this country talk about revolutions, but we've also had our own revolution. We had a revolution against England. We also had a big civil war that could have gone either way. People don't realize that this country is full of history and full of struggles. So this was another struggle in the Cuban history, and unfortunately, it was touch and go. We still believe that Castro could have gone either way, but he found more support and more money working with the Russians than he did working with the United States. And of course, the Russians wanted him bad. People don't realize, but we had missiles in Turkey, which is right outside, of Russia and Moscow. So the Russians really went all out to try to recruit Castro and get Cuba to be part of their group. At the same time, communists in general was taking over Asia, and we eventually got involved in the Vietnam War. The United States did, to try to, slow down that effect.
So how do you feel now that Fidel Castro is out of power and his brother is now?
Well, that's a tough question. We're still hopeful. We're still hopeful that nature will take its course, and hopefully him and his brother will pass on, and hopefully that the people of the country will be able to actually have a democracy and vote, and go back to the ways of the 1950s and 1940s, and close relationship with the United States. I think it's very important. I think the United States will help a lot, and hopefully go back to a wonderful country that it used to be before it was destroyed by Castro.
So, if any time in the next 10 or 20 years, Cuba becomes free and people are allowed to go back, would you go back?
Great question. Wow. As you can imagine, with 14 brothers and sisters and about 52 nephews and nieces and another 50 grandnephews and nieces, and you can imagine all the cousins. We talk on the email a lot. And it's a constant discussion. There are a lot of what we call the second and third generation that do want to go back and help with the system. I think my generation, we probably will not go back. One of my dreams when I retire would always be to go back and help in the school system somehow. But there are a lot of my nephews who are actively involved, and they have a lot of great ideas of how they can go back and help the country. Again, we don't want to go back and run the country. We'll let the people of Cuba run the country, but we would like to help them any way we can. And I think some of my nephews and nieces have some great ideas. They work for the government in D.C. area, and so they're familiar with how the government can help small businesses and enterprises get going again, and get the country back to where it was and where it could be, which is basically the paradise of the Caribbean.
So is there anything that has not been asked or has not been said that you would like to say?
No, you've done a great job. I'm impressed. You've done your homework. Good job.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the interview.
Thank you.
Hey, how about a handshake? Oh, you got it.